here grew up or knew someone in Skyline Acres? Okay, so I've got the right crowd. First of all, I want to thank, I don't know, Tim was just here a second ago. There he is. Oh, you took your hat off. I couldn't see you. The glare. So Tim, a good friend of mine, did a lot of research to help me out at the very end, and more than a third of the photos I've got that are fantastic came from Tim's research specifically. I want to thank, of course, Gil and Vicky and Elise for getting me involved with this whole thing. And I don't know if you were here last month for William. He runs Huntsville Revisited, did a Buffalo Soldiers thing. It's been about 15 years now, but he's actually the one that got me to really care more and research more about the local history that I grew up with. So anyway, Skyline Acres. I've lived there for 12 years, bought my house in 2012, the Dunlap house, 502 Stella Drive. A few years ago, I started buying land to build new homes. The neighborhood was never finished. E.B. High, we'll talk about a little bit later, dies in 1963, and the neighborhood is never completed. So the whole story behind this history project actually originates from, I was digging on Skyline, 212 Skyline. I have a big excavator, I'm digging big holes. I get a phone call from Johnny Blizzard at City of Madison, and he says, Dave, I got a phone call, told me you're over there digging up unmarked slave graves. Bit of a shock. Nothing like that was dug up at any point in time, to be clear, but it started this very long process of documentation and basically trying to understand what was there before I started building. And Steve Munger, who's also not here, purely because he already knows all this, but he and I worked on this project off and on for the last couple of years, and so this is mostly what I know to be true, and that's why I said it's mildly interesting, surprisingly long, and I think it's pretty cool. Hopefully a few of you will agree. So first of all, once again, thanks to Tim, we got this great full-page ad in the Sunday Huntsville Times from about 1959. So 210 lots. As I mentioned, the houses were never fully finished. There's a whole bunch of lots that are still undeveloped, mostly on lots that are going to be a nightmare to build on, that unfortunately I have to build those now. So one thing, does anybody remember Mallory Schwarzkopf? Does that sound familiar to anybody at all? Okay, they made capacitors, I found out. So once again, I've only had this information for a few days, so I might find it mildly more interesting than you guys do. But you can see this big full-page ad, great prices, free balloons, very exciting stuff. This is a very new thing for Madison at the time. This would have been only, I think, the second official master plan neighborhood. Anderson's back there might disagree with that. I believe your guys' namesake was already being developed in the late 50s, is that right? Right. So this would have been behind them and after Sina Vista. But this also was not in Madison City at the time, which is why it is where the city meets the country. So it's a great slogan. Okay, so this is an early aerial. A lot of the stuff I've got is just old government photos, old government maps and things. So 1950, neighborhood does not exist yet. Does anyone remember the rock quarry?
Yep.
Yes, okay, I have more questions about that. The interesting thing is the quarry is actually not listed on the map. I've made all the little annotations here. The quarry had zero history on that, so that's also something I have more information I would like. Yes, sir, you in the back.
That was on Hope Shelton's land that he bought. And he bought it during the Depression. And in order to pay his loan off, he paid, they quarried stone out of the quarry for the public works to build roads.
Interesting.
So that was part of his land.
Gotcha, okay. It's still there. Someone, I believe, a dermatologist, recently built a really nice custom home just on the other side of it. If anyone lived in Skyline Acres the last 5 years, that's probably what you heard every morning, rumbling while you were trying to sleep. They started as soon as they could. There was a lot of demolition involved with that. But as you can see, Skyline Acres is over here in the bottom right-hand corner area. It is, I believe at the time, just goat and like sheep fields, maybe some cattle, mostly just livestock. Very few trees, shockingly. Most of it was just farmland, or pasture land, I'm sorry. So 1962, we've got a nice overhead view here of some of the homes being built. I live right there. I did not have a laser pointer and couldn't borrow one before I got here. But you can kind of see everything kind of coming together. If you look right here in the bottom right here, that's almost the Goodman store, but not the Goodman store. I believe the Goodman store is just a little bit to the side. Unfortunately, the map did cut off right there where Skyline would be. But you can kind of see by 1962, had a good couple of homes. But as I mentioned, we never ended up finishing. Does anybody see that very faint kind of hook at the back there, for the top middle? Can I see that? Yeah. Okay, that's Mr. Pike's land. 0 houses were built back there. That whole section of the neighborhood is actually, that's actually High Road that continues all the way and hooks around, but no one goes back there. He has a lot of guns, and he's a very nice guy, but I've heard a lot of stories from folks that grew up there that people don't usually go back there. I've tried to talk to him a few times. I've got him to wave at me, which is about the most I've accomplished in 3 years of trying to talk to him. But anyway, the neighborhood actually continues upwards, and I'll get into it a little bit later. All this land on the, so if you look at the top row there, that's actually Lynn. Behind Lynn, before EB passes away, he actually was trying to develop another street of the neighborhood onto what is now still absolutely nothing. Chinese medicine doctor owns it now, and it's all rock, but I'll get to that a little bit later. Also, I'm gonna freeball this. I don't actually have anything really structured, so I might just interject random things as I go through it.
Can we ask questions?
Yes, of course.
Okay,
Linda.
is there a house on that extended high?
Yes, so if you go to the very back, now in 1962 there wasn't, but at the very end, there is a house, and there's a like a cinder block building of some kind. Mr. Pike has about 50 non-running cars, 2 boats. It's a lot of stuff. A whole bunch of old HVAC equipment from the arsenal, I also understand. Steve Munger's old house on what is the neighborhood currently, I think it's Inwood Trail, but from his backyard fence, which his daughter lives at, I was able to get on a ladder and look into the backyard. It looks like a lot of fun. I used to love Junk Church as a kid, but you know, that's not for everybody. But yeah, Mr. Pike's the only one that lives back there. And actually the reason why there's no houses back there, and I don't have a slide for this, but the funny thing is, for some reason, Steve Munger's dad had a map that was just those 9 lots in the back of the neighborhood. Not really sure, but based off a few bits of information, when EB dies, TC, Thaddeus Creech, his son, is in the neighborhood. And all of a sudden, he is saddled with being the owner and developer for the remainder of the neighborhood, which he does for a few years. But there is a point in time where it looked like a couple of guys doing some kind of investment bought all the lots. Only afterwards did they find out that the land wouldn't perk. So they couldn't get septic tanks to work, and the land is effectively worthless because it's all rock. So at the very end, literally, the backyard of his house looks onto what is the quarry, or what was the quarry. They were able to, I guess, do a raised septic system. I don't actually know how that works for them. It may not. They may have a big cistern. This was back before they had health department regulations, so I don't know how it actually works. But they were able to build one house at the very back, which is another reason why no one's ever developed it, because it was basically unbuildable.
Where is the quarry, or what is the quarry?
So the quarry is actually just outside of our neighborhood, but some of the, let's see, Bo Forrest isn't here either, but Bo Forrest and Steve Munger and Ronnie Rushing would go camping there when they were kids, and that's how I heard about it. I had actually found it about 10 years prior because, I can't remember the name of the road, but in the other neighborhood, it's just a dead end. And I just drove down there one day in whatever car I had that had high clearance and found it, didn't realize what it was, and then Steve told me about it later. Yes? Okay. Oh, yes,
So,
in the back.
So as a kid, we used to explore because, that's what we did. We weren't allowed inside.
Of course.
There's a cave up there.
over in the,
Behind, yeah, or close to the quarry, or wherever that mean man lives.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
he's, have you ever seen The Sandlot? Has anyone ever seen The Sandlot?
Yeah.
I believe he's like that. He's probably just misunderstood. But at the same time, he's a lot older now, and he's probably not gonna shoot me, so I have that going for me.
But if there was, yeah, we used to explore. There's a cave back there, I believe.
Yes, there is a cave back there. I don't know if it's still there, or if they've, well, I'm sorry. There was a cave there. They did close it off from what I believe Steve told me, but that could be wrong. But it is on private property now for this dermatologist.
Okay.
It is a nice house, though. Steve and I wouldn't explore it while they were still building it. You can do that, by the way. You know that. You just trespass whenever you want. As long as you're polite about it, I should say. Okay, so just kind of 1970. As you can see, the neighborhood's more than half finished at this point. I believe that TC and his family left in 1969, 1970. The High family started the whole thing, and I've actually been in communication with the High family. Sadly, no one currently alive remembers much. TC's wife is 93, and she doesn't really remember any specifics. All she knows is EB was here, and he called TC to come help him, and shortly after that, he left, he died, and then they left. So, nothing revelatory, unfortunately, yet. But once again, Tim's research has yielded a few more things that we'll get to in a minute. Okay, so this is kind of the boilerplate bullet point list of everything that I know for a fact. So we're just going to go through this kind of quickly here, but the whole thing has always been a speculative development. This was a master plan community almost from day one, but it has gone through many iterations and many owners. For a lot of places in Madison, if you look at an old map from the 1800s or the early 1900s, it's going to say Juan or Farley or Hughes or Anderson or something. You're going to see the same name for 200 years, and then you're going to see the neighborhood that Breland built. The one thing I like about this neighborhood is that it had a shocking number of people who lived on the land, developed the land, sold, redid the land, X, Y, and Z. So I don't have all of my notes in front of me, but the original land sale was purchased by a speculator named James Gordon at the 1818 land auction in downtown Huntsville. He had an emissary or somebody here who did the whole thing for him, never lived here, never came here for any records to prove he was here, and then he died. And then it went to the next folks. Okay. So it was mostly farmland, mostly pasture land. I don't know of anything that was specifically grown there. A lot of folks who are in their late 80s, early 90s now say that it was just goats. It was a goat farm prior to it becoming the neighborhood that it ended up being. But the one interesting thing is, I believe it's the Campers. When the Campers purchased the land from Mr. Binford, Binford actually said, okay, I'm gonna sell this land, you're gonna buy it, but the bottom corner of the land needs to be allocated for a school, the Binford Hill School. And that school was there in some form or fashion for a couple decades, not very long. Mr. Wren could probably better know than me, but it's where the gas station is now and where the Goodman store was for many years. So it's a little hazy. I tried to do some of the research with the land deeds, and it kind of jumps over a little bit here and there. But long story short, R.E. Spraggins used to be the president of the First Alabama Bank downtown Huntsville, is now currently Regions, but at the time he purchased the land, as you can see, for the tidy sum of $2,500. It was about 100 and plus acres, almost 200 acres at the time, and it goes to R.E., who also is president of the bank at some point. He retires to do land speculation and development and stuff. And what ends up happening is E.B. High, for the longest time, could not figure out how did he come here, of all places. So he's from a place called Nash County, North Carolina, Rocky Mount. It turns out that E.B. was an attorney. So as an attorney, obviously I would explain where he had the money to purchase the land, but he bought the land about 1954, I believe, officially. But he was in town because his wife had passed away in 1936. So he was a widower, he was a bachelor, and his kids were all grown by 1950. So he started coming to Huntsville, and actually the first record of him being in Huntsville, he was visiting Helen Hughes in the hospital, and he was there with some other friends and a lot of other names that sound regal and have, you know, streets named after him and stuff like that. So he was clearly well-heeled when he came here. From the best that I can tell, he lived and rented until 1953 when he sold his trailer. He lived in a trailer for a little bit. And one of the first purchases he makes is actually not Skyline Acres, but he purchases a church that we'll get to later in 1953 that was sitting on the land. So, but to jump around just a little bit, the road names. That was one of the first things that started this whole process when I first moved into the neighborhood. Every person I met in Skyline Acres said, oh, you know why this is named that? Well, it's this. And half the people were wrong and half the people were right. And nobody could agree that one or the other was correct. So it became very imperative for me to find the reasons why everything was Dex Nilsson. Why is it named that? Didn't even know about the book, but the whole goal was, for Huntsville, there's a lot of streets and a lot of places, and you don't know why they're named that. There's a great book by Dex Nilsson, explains why everything's called that. This is my very abridged version of that for Skyline Acres. So Stella was Evie's first wife, Stella May High. Skyline was, of course, the name of the neighborhood that they decided to name it. High Road is the most interesting. Now, Nancy is not here, but Nancy Gill, wife of Harold Gill, who was the co-developer of the first real estate agent for the neighborhood. They have been a fountain of information. Nancy could not be here. Her hearing is not so great. That's actually why we're recording this. It's for her, really. But anyway, she told me the great story about why it's called High Road. It was supposed to be named for their youngest daughter, Carol, but Carol with 2 R's and 2 L's was already being used on Montesano, and the county wouldn't allow them to do both, which is very weird because anyone who lives in Madison knows there's a high street and now there's a high road. I don't know how high and high were not too similar, but somehow 2 different spellings of the same name were too similar. But that's why it's called High Road and not Carol. Patricia, the first daughter of Harold Gill. Nancy, the wife of Harold Gill, obviously. Foy, this is the big one. People always think Foy. Well, that must be incorrect. Somebody must have gotten that wrong somewhere in there. I've met a lot of folks in the neighborhood who said it used to be Fox, and it was a misspelling. It makes sense. Why on earth would anyone call something Foy? Well, when your first son's named Thaddeus and your second one is named Foy, it makes more sense. Xavier Brooks had a lot of weird names in his family. They've all normalized, by the way. They all had very normal names like Lisa and Jerry, normal names now. But Foy was actually his youngest son. It was not a typo. It is a weird name. Sadly, he passes away working in a shipyard in Norfolk, Virginia. And Lynn, the last street, I have no idea. Nobody knows. There is not a single person named Lynn in either family tree for anyone who's worked in the neighborhood. But the widow of T.C. Hyde, a few weeks ago, said she thinks, she's not for sure, but she thinks that Lynn was the name of the daughter of the attorney who put this together. I've not been able to track down the name of that attorney, but that is the best guess we have currently, but it's not confirmed, which is why it's still unconfirmed. So, first owners. I didn't know Bern was actually going to make it, but I'm glad he's here. Bern Seiler, over here in the bottom right. This is him right here, this handsome young man with the very European glasses. He wears contacts now, I'm assuming? No glasses anymore? That's it. I'm not talking loud enough for him. But that's him, that's his mom and his dad. Bern lives in, now listen, I design and build homes for a living, and I still think his house is the best looking house in the whole neighborhood. It is just an epic home. It's beautiful. I'm glad I've been able to be in it and take photographs of it, and I'm very fortunate to have these photos of it being constructed. So, but over here on the left, this is John and Barbara Munger, and this is Steve and his sister Lorinda. This is Easter 1959. The Mungers were the first family to live in the neighborhood. They moved in February of 1959. Nancy would disagree with that. Nancy said she was the first one there, but Steve is very insistent that it was February of 1959, so we're going to go with Steve. So anyway, the Mungers were the first ones to live there, but as I mentioned, the Silers have the best house in the neighborhood. And I've got a few more photos of that. There we go. Okay. So this is the house. This is 229 Skyline. If you look over here on the right, can anyone tell me what they think that house off in the distance is? Well, yeah, Elise, you know, because you've seen the photo. That was for people who didn't already hear me tell the story. She's trying to ruin it. I knew she was going to heckle me a little bit, but I didn't expect that. Yes, that is actually the Slaughter Mansion. Impossible to think that you could see the Slaughter Mansion all the way from Skyline Acres, but apparently you could. So anyway, like I said, house on the left, 229, it's gorgeous, beautiful house, my favorite. It's actually the reason why I came to the neighborhood. Many years ago, I would get stuck in that horrible traffic on Slaughter Road trying to get to Madison Academy. You know when I used to back up all the way to Eastview? I used to get stuck in that every morning trying to get to school in about 2000, 2001. And I would see this house every day, and I thought, man, that's a cool looking house. So when I started looking for a house in 2011, 2012, this was the first neighborhood I came into. I ended up living in the neighborhood purely because of the whole county zoning thing. So for some of you who live here, most of you live in a city-zoned house in Madison City. The reason why the city of Madison is such a nightmare to deal with on my end is because my neighborhood is a patchwork. We are the first neighborhood that was allowed to be annexed in, but the city at the time was not very powerful, and they were like, well, let's just annex in one by one. And they had all these weird rules, and they don't really have those rules anymore. But thankfully, not everybody annexed in. I did not annex in personally, and I never planned to. Over my dead body, I always tell people. So the thing I love about the neighborhood is I was able to live and work in the neighborhood, be in the heart of everything, and now we don't have children. So of course, if you have kids, great. You want to be in Madison City Schools. Didn't affect me. So at the time, I wasn't married to my current wife, so I really didn't care. But the neighborhood is great in that regard, where you can be literally in the middle of everything, but have county zoning, county rules. It's my still favorite part of the whole neighborhood. Gives you a lot more freedom. So 1963, E.B. Hyde passes away rather suddenly. It's not clear that he had an illness of any kind, but probably just had a heart attack. He was a good ripe old age when he passed away. Well, no, he wasn't. He was only 70. Never mind. He was not that old. I'm sorry. I thought he was 85. My notes were incorrect. 70 is not very old, so it was a little bit sudden that he passed away. I did have a photo of him, but I could not find it in time for the presentation. I have no idea what happened to it, but anyway, he was not the fittest guy at 70, let's just say. But he was quite the ladies' man. He actually was courting Billy Drake's sister back in the mid-50s. I was thinking of like a Jay Gatsby type. Anybody read The Great Gatsby? We all read that?
Yeah.
Anyway, so charming debonair, outsider, did very well here. He did not end up dating Miss Drake for very long. And actually, right after TC came up here, E.B. left, went to Florida, and married a woman named Ruby, and moved back. No word on Ruby. Ruby's passed away as well, but anyway, it was a bit of a shock to TC and his wife at the time, per the story I just heard a few weeks ago. So the issue is that TC has been helping his dad for just a year or so at this point. Harold Gill has already left. You may remember on the first slide it said Gill Realty. Now it's Reliable. Harold Gill and E.B. had a bit of a falling out. Once again, going by what Nancy said, Harold was not the easiest for her to get along with. He had a lot of ups and downs with his personal and business relationships. So it sounds like E.B. cut off the situation and went with Reliable Realty. Unfortunately, all the names listed here as representatives, I was not able to do any kind of research on them. It would be exciting to talk to somebody who might remember anything like this to get some more details. But question for the audience, has anyone ever heard of KVK Furniture Factory? I was really hoping somebody would. No one has on the internet, no one in this room. I have no idea what it was, but it was at the corner of Highway 20 and Slaughter Road, right next to the Mallory capacitor factory. Mallory became, Mallory became a battery manufacturer. Zenith bought them. Mallory moved to South Parkway, and then Zenith eventually moved down to over by the airport, and John Blue bought the old buildings, the old warehouses, and was there until 2004, something like that. Now, of course, it's just been a vacant field for 20 years. But anyway, so we've got 1963 over here on the right, and only 130 left. So they developed nearly half the neighborhood in just a few short years. They did sell like hotcakes. Very conveniently for EB, he just happened to be at the right place at the right time. At the same time as he was getting this whole neighborhood off the ground, somebody had the bright idea to do a theme park that some of you may have heard of, the Space City, that never happened. Well, there was a lot of money being wasted in Madison at that time, but luckily for us, EB did not have his money go to waste completely because we have the neighborhood to actually vouch for it now. What's next? Okay, you're probably thinking, but Dave, but what about all the graves? What about all the bodies? So first of all, interesting story, it was not illegal in Alabama to disturb a grave until 1995. You could dig up or bury whomever you wanted until the mid-90s in Alabama. Which, if anyone knows anything about the Birmingham Zoo, there's a lot of Potter graves that were, just kind of bulldozed over, so to speak. So it's very likely that there were, in fact, unmarked graves in Skyline Acres, but according to the state of Alabama's person in charge of cemeteries, there is no officially recognized cemetery that was ever in or on Skyline Acres. But there is a lot of evidence to say that there was something else there. So here's what I do know. 1953, a year before he purchases the land that would become Skyline Acres, EB purchases Fuller Chapel CME, Colored Methodist Episcopal Church. So from the research that I've done, and a lot of help from John Rankin over here, it looks like the Slaughter family had a... Now, the other weird thing about this that was really confusing for the longest time is Slaughter Road is the dividing line. The Slaughter family, at least going back to the 1870s, the oldest map I have, the Slaughter family never owned anything on this side of what we call Slaughter Road now. So it seems odd that they would have given their slaves a church on what would have been Binford or Camper land, or Gordon land. I don't know why, but for the longest time, this is a tax map from the early, I guess it's 1960. You see a little box with a cross there? That's right about Stella Drive's entrance. So for a while, I thought, okay, that's got to be it. Riley Slaughter and Connie Longford were the pastors at the time in 1953. The church actually still exists in a new form. Low Methodist over on Sanders is actually the same church. Miss Lowe actually donated the money and land for their first church, and I believe helped purchase the land the church currently sits on. Unfortunately, Mr. Wayman, the current pastor, when I first spoke to him, he said, "Oh, I've been there. I've seen the footings where the church was." I have no idea where he was because, according to everything I found, the church was physically inside the neighborhood, and there are no forms to anyone's church or anything else. Although hilariously, actually I didn't see this, when we built the addition in my house, when we dug up the backyard, we found the footer for an entire house, and we didn't know why it was there. So maybe it was in my backyard, I don't know. It probably wasn't. But anyway, the church was more than likely right about where Miss Bentley's house is, the first house on the right. Another reason when trying to do this initial research was the Skyline lots that I own are just a sheer drop off from the street. It would have been a nightmare to have composed or had a building there. So it seemed a lot more likely to me when I found this map that, oh, well, yeah, of course they built the church on the flat land that, would have had a building and maybe they could have buried people there. But once again, everyone's septic tank in their backyard would have been excavated a long time ago. So there probably aren't any bodies. If there were unmarked graves, they unfortunately would have been desecrated decades ago before most of us, a good number of us, were not born yet. So, but anyway, that is the biggest mystery almost solved. But then yesterday, I was going through some other maps, and there it is, clear as day. 1936, the USGS topo map lists, that is a lot blurrier than it is on my computer, by the way. I apologize for that. That was crystal clear. It is very clear on the screen. I don't know why it looks like that, but if you look right here, you've got a kink in the road. You got a kink in the road. So that big line right there, that's Old Madison Pike. Long story short, Fuller Chapel is listed as being right there in the neighborhood. That weird dotted line is an old lumber logging road, right, Elise? Yes. So the telephone line runs along that. It still kind of runs along Slaughter Road, kind of a ridge there. If you look at this blue line right here, that's at the edge of the neighborhood. A lot of folks that would be about 70 now might remember the big ditch. This is the ravine that the water ran through. That was the big ditch. So, as I was talking to John about this earlier, so this is 1936. So this is clearly definitive proof that Fuller Chapel was exactly where we thought it was. It was in the neighborhood. There was a church in the neighborhood. That's the proof. Here's where it gets weird. So in the next slide, beautiful. I can see that so clearly. I hope everyone else can. You got a big kink again. But for some reason, they're calling the exact same building now Union Hill School, which it was not. It was never, Union Hill School was never in the neighborhood. Binford Hill School would have been about right there where the gas station is. So, unfortunately, the first slide seems to confirm everything that this whole research project started to do, and then the government throws me this, which is just an incorrect labeling. But we go to the next one. Oh, can't read any of that, but yeah, it's very clear on the screen. I don't know why it's doing that. Basically, this is the neighborhood, and in 1963, the USGS topo map actually calls Foy Fox. So the folks that thought it was Fox and said, no, you're wrong, I've seen it, someone told me it was Fox. Yes, that's correct. Most people probably saw this map, and the map was wrong. It was never Fox, it was always Foy, but this explains how people came to think it was Fox. One random map from the government 60 years ago got it wrong. Everything else is correct, though. Okay, so these folks aren't here, but Troy and Diane Wynn are actually still there. Diane and Troy are very active to this day, and they've been there since day one. This is a photo of the front of their house from 1970. And Shirley and Natalie Johnson, Shirley's now passed away, but Natalie actually lives in her childhood home. There are actually quite a few people in the neighborhood. Of course, some folks just own their childhood home, but there's more than a few people who actually still live in the house they grew up, they moved back into, to be clear. They moved back into it, they didn't just never leave home or something. I actually thought it was kind of weird. Fun story about Steve Munger. For the longest time, I just thought he was some doddering old man who never left the neighborhood. And then I found out, oh, he actually had moved out. So then I realized a lot of the folks that still live in the neighborhood had moved and then come back, which made things a lot better for everybody, I think. But it's great that the neighborhood has got a lot of diversity to it now. You've got a lot of younger folks there. You've got a lot of folks who have come back who are older. And of course, like I said, Diane and Troy have been there since 1960. They were the first residents of 401 Stella. And the house looks even better than it did back then. Troy takes excessively good care of his lawn.
They were not the first residents of 401 Stella.
They were not.
No, the Tuckers.
The Tuckers.
Charles and Faye Tucker.
When did they move out?
66.
Oh, okay. Well.
Because I'm
Yes.
Terry, I live right across the street at 402 Stella.
Oh, yeah.
That's correct.
Yes, she would know.
Yeah.
You'll have to excuse me. That is.
Terry.
I don't remember if you ever told me that or not, but that's once again the reason why I wanted as many folks who live there to catch me on stuff like this. So this is very good, and thank you for coming to it. Well, the Rehages are still original. They've been there the first residents.
Well, I told you in that email that my mom and dad, of course,
Mhm.
passed,
Yes.
but, and I know we weren't the first ones to live there, but they always told me that we moved into that 402 Stella Halloween night, 1959.
Right.
So by the Mungers being there in February of
Mhm.
'59, and I know they were there before us,
Mhm.
that kind of still falls, in line.
Oh, yeah. The other thing you have to remember, I was born in '87, so if someone tells me they've been there for 70 years, I'm usually gonna think, oh, that's day one. Larry Morphew is not here, but when I met him a few years ago, he said he hadn't been there very long, and then said, oh, only about 60 years. Which is true, because there are some folks who've been there even longer than him. Frank Key is the original resident of 101 Lynn. What is the point of all this? History brings us all together. I've always loved history. I wanted to be a history teacher. My dad said he wouldn't pay for college if I wanted to be for a teacher. Very smart man, glad I didn't do it. But I love history, it's a great hobby, I enjoy doing it, and this has been the result of it. When I started this project, we'd all lived through COVID, a lot of us had been isolated for a long time, and I'm over here knocking on your door, asking all these questions about stuff that happened 50 years ago, sometimes longer ago. And the one thing I heard repeatedly from everyone was, I used to know so-and-so, and now I don't know anybody. So I decided to take it upon myself, once again with Steve Munger's insistence that I do it, not him. I have a Christmas party. So we decided to start inviting folks who had lived in the neighborhood, grew up there, moved away. Some of us still live there, and some of us don't live too far away, and we get on to Chris, we're not showing up every year, I believe. Isn't that right? Chris is always too busy to come. But a lot of folks have started coming, and so these are pictures from the first and second year, I believe. But you see Mark right there, and Elise can vouch for you. Mark's not a very friendly guy. There's very few photos of Mark smiling. And Joni and Mark do not get along, but we had a good makeup after that. Well, they almost got into a fist fight in the first one. Isn't that how I remember it that way? But the point is, we have folks from all over the neighborhood, folks that don't live there anymore. And once again, we've got, obviously there's my wife right there, but you can see Anna over here. We have folks that just moved to the neighborhood that come. And so the point of this whole thing has been the neighborhood feels smaller again. Hopefully, folks know their neighbor from a few blocks over and not just the person who didn't mow their lawn last summer and you're just really upset with him and everything. And we have those, obviously, but one of the best parts about Skyline Acres, there's no HOA. There's nobody sending you a passive-aggressive letter. Listen, I wish that Ray Seal's new homeowners would mow the lawn. We all do. They don't. But the difference is that I'm more likely to send Gardencio, who takes care of Troy's yard, who also takes care of my really bad allergies. I'm more likely to send somebody over to mow Scott's yard than I am, to get a passive-aggressive letter, or worse, send them a fine. That's the best part about the neighborhood, is that it is one of the last bastions in Madison where you have a cohesive neighborhood that's not open to cross streets and everything. Not that I'm disparaging the Anderson boys' neighborhood, but there's a lot of ways to get in and out of that area. So the best part about Skyline is that it is blocked off. You can't just, it's not a path through for anyone. I grew up on Leather Tree Lane. Does anyone know where Leather Tree Lane is? They had to put speed bumps in because kids were gonna get clipped. In fact, I hit a car one time, but it wasn't crazy. Like I was on my bike. Anyway, the point is Skyline Acres is a safe, closed-off neighborhood, but it's not an HOA neighborhood. Another reason why I love it. And then the final thing was, it's been about 2 years now. 2 years ago, some jerk was drinking or something and somehow managed to fly up and hit the sign on Lynn. His Toyota Camry literally destroyed the sign, broke it into about 5 pieces, and then broke the brick. So it became a project where I had already gone through and met a lot of the neighbors. So it was like, okay, so what can we do here? And so we did a fundraiser, and we got new signs made up. Now these signs are aluminum, they're powder coated, and the stickers are letters, they're UV resistant, they're reflective. The signs are easier to replace, and they should last another couple of decades. So, also we couldn't get the lights to work again because they were gas lines. Fun fact, I called the gas company for over a year to come turn off the gas. They swore to me they'd shut off the gas. I said, you're sure? We promise, it's 100% done. I said, I want to be 100%. As I'm installing this sign, the gas line ruptures. and we have a massive gas leak, and I have to finish this. I'm on a deadline here, so I'm still installing the sign while the gas is actively leaking out. Luckily for everyone, I had found the shutoff they said didn't exist in the ground. The gas company comes out. The shutoff valve, of course, is completely rusted. It's an old copper shutoff valve. I hadn't heard of that. Anyway, it did not work, and so we actually had to go back to my house to get the tools to shut off the gas line. And then they came out, they killed the line, and then they finally, after that incident, they finally went over to the other one and killed that line too. The brick, by the way, is being repaired on Friday, finally. But anyway, new signs, new matching signs. The signs that were there were actually wood, and while they were restored about 10 years ago by David Percival, I believe was his last name, great guy, took it upon himself to do it. But the signs were from the 80s. Let's see here, Monty Gunterman, I believe, designed them, had them built, and
Really?
yes. Well, Linda lives in her old house.
Yeah, I bought the house from you.
Yes, she lives in Monty's old house.
Wow.
But so the thing was that it was impossible to find out. No one had a photo of what the original sign said, or how it was originally written. I had been told it was wrought iron. And actually, I don't have a photo of it, but on the side of this sign, there are 3 holes in the brick. And almost like an Egyptologist, I was trying to figure out what it could have been, what it could have meant. Unfortunately, I was not able to find out what any of that was. I assume it was a sign that said, office open or something, because in the vacant lot, so this is actually a lot in Skyline Acres, but the church owns Skyline Baptist. No relation at all, by the way. They just picked the name after us. They actually own the land, but they allow us to keep, even though we're not supposed to have a sign there. We are grandfathered in, but really, if someone were to push it, they could easily just make us take it down. There's no rule that would allow us to keep the signs. And then Frank Key over on Lynn also allows us to keep the sign, which is also very nice of him. But anyway, so we've got the new signs. We did a fundraiser, and I'm very fortunate that we had more people that wanted to contribute than the cost of the repair. There were a few folks that reached out to me months afterwards and were very upset, but I'm very happy to say that actually we were raising the money so quickly, I had to stop accepting donations of $100 because I wanted more people to feel like they were included and contributed. So the point is, we have a really strong sense of community now that I don't think we had as much a few years ago, and certainly we didn't have when I moved in 2012. And yes, ma'am.
The first picture, the
Yes.
flyer,
Yes, ma'am.
what was the cost of those homes back then? The very first flyer.
1395.
Yeah. There.
Yes.
How much did a home cost then?
Lot prices began at $1,500, and the houses started at $14,000. I believe Mr. Becton is the only person. Is anyone know Mr. Becton? The Bectons? Yes. I believe Mr. Becton was the only person who had non-brick siding originally while E.B. Howe was alive. So if anyone got a house for $13.95, it was Mr. Becton. Did anyone, let's see here, 600 Stella. I actually had them printed off. I was going to pass them around. Of course, I forgot them. But anyway, 600 Stella, it turns out, was actually the model home that they advertised for the open house. And it's, of course, completely different now. The gentleman who lives there now, I believe he's just been put in a home of some kind. But they added a garage, and they bricked off the carport, but not fully. Anyway, you can't recognize it from the photos. And the photo was pretty bad. I could barely tell what it was when it was printed out. It would have looked, I guess, worse if I had blown it up. But anyway, most of the homes, it's a funny thing. So 502 Stella didn't have 2 bathrooms. It had 1 bathroom.
Yeah, they end up with.
What do you have a question for?
Where'd you get the inspiration for the sign design?
The sign design?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I forgetting? What was the inspiration for the sign design?
The yard.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, I forgot what they were talking about. So you have to forgive me. Most of the people in the neighborhood have already heard these stories, so I didn't want to belabor the point, but there was and I'm not going to forget about you.
No, I was letting you know that she had her hand up. You
Oh.
couldn't see it.
I was trying to ignore her.
He was intentionally ignoring her.
So we had a few people, the Butts specifically, they didn't like the sign. She sent me she actually posted a very rude message and then realized that everyone else liked the sign, so she deleted her comment. She's about my age though, so I'm not attacking someone older, but she lives right behind me. So, the sign. Do you like the sign? Doesn't matter. Here's why the sign is the way the sign is. This lettering and this exact font is actually the handmade sign for the Skyline Acres Garden of the Month or Yard of the Month Club. So, I had a friend who digitally traced the hand-done sign that we had a photo of, a very grainy photo, and she digitally recreated the font to be used specifically for the sign. And that's why we also did one that had a decent contrast, but we didn't want it to look brand new. I didn't want it to look, too gaudy. But at the same time, it needed to be reflective for just safety reasons, I guess. But it's not going to be reflective very long because the tree sap on that tree is going to cover it very soon. I pressure washed, so here's the other thing. So I pressure washed the brick and then I painted it. And actually Caitlin actually picked this color. The brick is painted almost exactly the color that it was because I didn't want it to be, people paint, well, my mother has a white brick house that I had to paint for her, but I don't want to just paint everything white. Mountain Brook, my old neighborhood, for no reason at all, they just decided to paint their sign white. I don't know why. The goal was to make the signs look the same without changing them too much. And the reason why we had to paint the brick is not because I love to paint brick, but because the other sign is so damaged that the mortar and brick repair is going to be extremely obvious very soon because they don't make the brick color at all anymore. So I had to paint them and make them both match. So in a few more, let's see, another 2 weeks or something, we'll have both signs finished and everything will be clean and good for a couple of decades. But that was the inspiration for the sign because it was really difficult to, after so many decades, go, okay, we have 200 people, we're gonna have 200 opinions. So the goal is how can we eliminate a lot of people saying, well, it should look like this, it should look like that. This is the only historical evidence we have for a font for Skyline Acres, and that's why we went with it. It's not even my favorite. People think I picked it. I wanted to do something different. I was gonna have Skyline in circles, and then Acres. Anyway, it was gonna look more like the Space City sign, but everyone poo-pooed that idea. Anyway, questions, comments? Yes?
How many homes are in Skyline Acres?
So there were 210 lots originally. About 10 of those about 20 of those were basically unbuildable. 9 of them are up in Pikes Peak, I call it.
Today's how many homes?
Oh, there's just under 200 homes, about 190 homes.
So what would you average? I know, they've been there a long time. What would you average them out price?
Well, if I built it, it's worth a lot more because it's brand new. But I would say the average price in the neighborhood is probably between $300 and $350. If it's not been renovated, if it's original condition, it's the same size, it's probably worth maybe $250. So I would say for basically a knockdown house in the neighborhood, you're looking at $200 to $250. Let's see here, Lloyd Bray's house is up on a hill. It's in rough shape. It's got a major, he doesn't live there currently for the record. It's got a major bee infestation. And we don't know how bad the damage is and stuff. So, I mean, we could end up finding out that that's gonna be, a major, major issue sometime. But yeah, the neighborhood itself has recovered. When I actually moved in the neighborhood in 2012, there were 20 foreclosures. And my real estate agent was concerned that the house would not appraise for $78,000. I paid $78,500 for my house, but I've added on to it. It's a lot bigger now, and obviously, yeah, it's a little bit bigger. Yeah, that's why we had the Christmas party at my house. I have a 6-car garage, so we opened it up, and it's enough room for maybe 75 people, something like that. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I had a friend who lived on High Road, and their last name was Grising.
I know Miss Grising. Miss Grising and I met a few years ago. I very briefly, for about 3 weeks, owned their home. So the Grising home, it's not as cool as Burns' house, but it is the only other really cool mid-century modern example in the neighborhood. Now, unfortunately, my friend Nemo bought it from me because he had a need for it. He's got 2 young children. He needed to be 3 bedrooms, all on 1 floor. So he has renovated it to, it's perfectly fine, he does very good work, but he basically took all the spirit and essence of the house, and it's gone. And I I hate it
You
too.
had a basement daycare.
Oh, yes, yes, the basement, what basically still is, his kids are, what, 5 and 6 now? It's a big jungle gymnasium thing down there, but now there's a bedroom and a better bathroom. But yes, before he did it, I bought it and it was basically about how they left it. But I actually have, the photos that she gave me are actually not very old, that's why I didn't include them. But if you go on Facebook, you'll see the photos of her house that she gave me to put on the Facebook page.
Her husband built a lot of the woodwork, you know, in the kitchen.
Yes, well, he designed the house from what I understand.
He did that.
It's a beautiful home. I actually, when we were doing the renovation, I actually, inside of one of the walls, there's actually a hidden compartment behind the pantry, was a Sears decorating catalog from like 1966 or something like that. I still have it, it's very cool. I still like some of the designs in there. But the house, she didn't have any photos of the house from the 60s or 70s, but it is a very nice house. It is very unique. And it had a solar hot water heater system that he put up there. Husband was an engineer, very, very inventive guy. Beautiful home. Yes, very good home. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Molly Harrison Sadler,
Yes.
and I grew up right next door to the Mongers, between the Mongers and the Wins.
Yes.
And we lived there in 1959. The house that you said was your favorite,
Yes, ma'am.
is that the house at the end of High, on the last house on the right?
No, the house I'm talking about is the last house on Skyline.
Oh, on the top.
Mhm.
Okay.
The last house on, so if you're going down High Road, you mean the one on the high side or the one on the low side?
On the lower side. It's in
Um,
the corner.
Yes, that's Barry's house now. I would not say that's my favorite house. It's okay.
It looks sort of like that house, and the view looks sort of like.
The view, yes. The design, Ms. Harrison, I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that one. It's a very generic split level ranch, which if it's the house I think you're talking about, it's okay. But I'm gonna argue that Burns' house is an actual gem. It should be preserved after he's gone. Yes, what would you call that? What design is that in the windows, Bern? What design is that in the windows with the diamond shape? Is that Tudor style windows?
I don't understand the question.
That's okay.
The windows.
That's right. The windows. There's a design. There's the diamond shaped design in your windows. What design is that called?
I don't know.
That's okay. Well, we'll call it Tudor style. I've never heard that. That's probably what it is. Like I said, the other thing about the neighborhood was, because there were no rules or regulations really, because it was mostly county, you could build a truly unique house without having to do, once again, not to, Lewis Breland tells you what you can build sometimes. And so being able to be in a neighborhood where there was no committee, no one could tell me what I could or couldn't do. We get unique houses like the Seiler residence. The Anderson, not they're in a different Anderson, Laura Anderson, there's a 3-story A-frame house that her dad, Don, custom built. The house has got beautiful walnut paneling all through the house. And she recently actually bought it from her brother and had it fully restored to a very high standard. I have still not been inside to take new photos, but it is another example of our neighborhood having more unique structures. And for me, for the designing and the building, I can design a house that I want to see and it'll find a market because you're in a neighborhood full of unique homes. And even some of the generic homes that were built, they still have a lot more flair than some of the other homes that I've seen in Huntsville. But that's why I like our neighborhood. Any other questions? Thank you folks for coming.
So that was super good, Dave. I learned a lot. I realize I haven't read through Skyline Acres in 8 or 10 years. I'm going to go soon. So, can you leave this up? Because I think we'd like to read something.